Okay, so I am super excited. We've never done anything quite like this in our history of our Wednesday conversations. I have with me today Susan and Annie and Ella and Michael. And we put a little bit of an introduction in the announcement for this morning, but this presentation is an adaptation of the first part of an interview essay called The Bad, A Story of Meth in the Mountains. And it's from an essay collection in a book titled From the Front Lines of the Appalachian Addiction Crisis, Healthcare Providers Discuss Opioids, Meth, and Recovery, edited by Wendy Welch. And the book is available through Appalachian's Belk Library, the University Bookstore, through Amazon, and from the publisher McFarland Books, which is located in Ashe County. From the Front Lines was the 50th book published in their Contributions to Southern Appalachian Studies series. I'm going to put the link to the book in the chat in just a second. And then, sorry, I'm trying to scroll down on my introduction. So as I mentioned, the people's names just real briefly, we're going to have with us Ella Markland, who's a longtime mental health nurse practitioner with Appalachian Regional Behavioral Health. And then the words from the expert with the pseudonym Misty is the mother of 3 now adult children, and she descends from a family that has had its roots in Boone since the 1700s. And in order to protect her privacy and safety in our small community, her parts will be read by Annie Woodford, who is a poet and English professor at Wilkes Community College. Then the essay's author is Susan Weinberg, and she's been a writer and associate professor of creative writing at Appalachian State University since 1994. She was assisted in the writing of this piece by her colleague Sandra Ballard, the editor of Appalachian Journal, a regional Appalachian Studies journal based at Appalachian State. And we also will have, we will feature 2 poems by Michael, who that's his pseudonym as well. He's Misty's adult son and also a student at Wilkes Community College. And so for questions, usually I'm very relaxed and informal. You can make comments all the way through. You're welcome to make comments in the chat. Any questions that you have, because this is going to be like the reading of a script kind of, we'll hold those to the end. So you're welcome to put a question in the chat. I'll share that with them between 12:45 and 12:50. Or you can hold it to the end when we open it up to questions. So if you are not going to be speaking, just make sure you're muted. It looks like everybody is. And so we're excited to have you, Susan and Ella and Annie and Michael. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Great, thank you. So I want to start by thanking Misty and Ella very much for so generously sharing from their time and their lives, and also editor Wendy Welch for inviting our contribution to her essay collection. I also want to thank Annie Woodford for sharing Misty's story today, and my colleague Sandy Ballard for her immense help in planning this interview and editing this essay. So I'm going to start with some of my written introduction, and then we'll move between Ella's and Misty's, and finally her son Michael's voices at the end. So this story is called The Bad, or essay is called The Bad, which will become clear in the context, I think. Meth was the urgent story that spanned the decades before and after the new millennium in our mountain community, evoking scenes from Daniel Woodrell's Winter's Bone. That 2010 film became the eventual public face of rural substance abuse. Set in the Ozarks, Winter's Bone delivered an extreme depiction of what meth does to families and individuals, but it made a larger audience aware of meth addiction. The title Winter's Bone became shorthand used by some community and healthcare workers desperate to communicate the growing crisis they faced and the ever-increasing resources it would require. That included people like Ella Markland, a mental health nurse practitioner. A lifelong resident of the area, her family's roots reach back to the 1800s. She was born during the Nixon presidency, just miles from the behavioral health facility where she is now a clinician. Until recently, when she began full-time office practice, her days alternated between working with patients in one of the few behavioral health units in the region and in office practice at one of the few scarce local clinics that accept Medicaid. So I asked Ella when the issue of meth first came to her attention.
In the early 2000s, I worked at one of the two correctional facilities in this county. And I remember wondering, why are all these inmates buying up every single box of Sudafed in the commissary? There was never Sudafed. And they would come to the medical clinic and always complaining of congestion and wanting Sudafed. And it was all of us like, why are they buying so much Sudafed? But later I learned why. It's because they were making methamphetamine in the prison. I began treating people fighting meth addiction at that behavioral health facility, and you know, I really didn't realize it at the time how prevalent both meth production and addiction was.
Okay. Thank you. So Misty was born 7 years after Ella to a long-established family whose surnames trace back to the area's colonial settlers. She grew up the oldest child of alcoholic and addicted parents, raised in childhood largely by traditional Baptist grandparents and an aunt. The childhood ended when she was told she needed to quit high school, 9th grade, to look after her 3 younger siblings.
Oh, Annie, you're muted.
By 1997, I was out of my parents' home and beginning life with my boyfriend. Friends who came over to party one night offered me a substance that gave me incredible energy. I didn't know what it was, but afterwards I craved it. I could clean a whole house, cook dinner, wash baskets of laundry, and have energy to spare. Whatever it was, I just started using the stuff. Like Ella, it was only after things were far too gone that I first heard the word meth.
A few years later, when Misty's meth addiction caused a shattering panic attack, the episode brought her to the hospital unit where Ella eventually would work. Soon, like many others driven by meth, Misty temporarily lost custody of her own 3 children.
Meth just took the place of everything. I had no healthy relationships anymore. I wasn't who I was. I lost interest in everything I'd cared for. I ended up hating meth, but at the same time, the drug was my everything. Meth ended up being everything that it took the place of.
In the early 2000s, the meth epidemic drove foster parent recruitment across Appalachia. Horror stories abounded of exploding trailers and kids hosed down by firemen in the driveway at midnight to remove toxic traces of meth before being hustled off to pre-dawn medical inspections. Explosions of homes and lives, these disasters took every stitch of a child's familiar clothing, blankets, car seats, and stuffed animals. Anything that could be infused with toxic meth fumes. A little before Misty discovered meth, Appalachia discovered opioids. Then came the pain pills, pain clinics, pill mills, lock boxes, overdoses, heroin, Narcan, lawsuits, funerals, needles, and balls of foil on small town sidewalks, flooding in with blame, tears, and outrage. Opioids changed the story. Before opioids, meth had been an unphotogenic hillbilly drug, sometimes jokingly romanticized as the new moonshine by people who thought themselves clever enough to have stayed outside its reach. Meth was further stigmatized as being a drug of poverty, and the scary before and after photos that made the rounds on social media never seemed to feature prom queens or student council officers as its users. Little public sympathy for addicted parents emerged when their children bore the consequences of adult actions. Yet guilt and regret over their children's suffering could do nothing but fuel the search for more release from pain and sadness. By contrast, the media often depicted opioid addicts as well-meaning people who got hooked on a legitimate prescription given by a trusted family physician. It was a more relatable story, perhaps, and even affluent parents might have friends or coworkers whose family's own luck had run out when a sibling or teen child fell into the opioid trap. Opioid addiction was a story more people could relate to, and it was an affliction with a much broader reach. I asked Ella to tell me her view of this. A characteristically gentle and neutral professional, she was clearly pained that her patients' most common needs go unheeded.
I think meth use has always been high in this region, but the attention shifted to opioids when the president declared it a crisis. President Trump declared opioids a public health emergency back in October of 2017. The visibility also shifted as opioids began afflicting families at higher socioeconomic levels. the children of politicians become addicted, and that's when it gets noticed. And that's when the president declares, oh, there's an opioid crisis. But when addicts are hillbillies, when they're poor people from the hills and the hollers of Appalachia, who really cares? This country's never changed anything until it starts to affect the rich. And I personally don't see the resurgence of meth as a consequence of national policy changes or state lawsuits. And I don't believe it's been a simple substitution of one drug for another. There's not been a simple substitution of meth for opioids. And now that further restrictions such as the National Prescription Monitoring Program database is in place, the shift from controlled prescription drugs is to heroin and not back to methamphetamine. Meth use has always been high here and it just never went away. But whatever the drug and wherever the public's attention may be, the outcome is the same. For the user, it's just like going to a casino with a big stack of cash. No matter how smart you are or how careful you think you are, if you play long enough, the drugs always win.
For more than 2 decades, Misty proved Ella's point. So it's a miracle that Misty is still alive and in her early 40s and rebuilding the bonds with her now adult, but still vulnerable children.
My own parents were alcoholics and addicts, so I grew up more away from them. My grandmother and papa and aunt raised me for the most part. My parents kept their secrets very, very private. I didn't know until I was an adult that my dad and mom both were addicts. I knew they were alcoholics, but I didn't know they were addicts as well. They kept a very private life.
Parental addiction cost Misty both youth and education, as well as close relationships with teachers who had praised and encouraged her. A few of them cried when she explained that she was being pulled out of 9th grade.
I told my teachers I needed to take care of my younger sister and brothers. I had to make sure they would get on the bus. I had to take care of them at nights, make sure their homework was done or whatever.
She went from taking care of siblings to painting homes on a crew, earning a GED, working at Taco Bell, and mourning the death of her beloved grandmother, all while carrying and caring for her own young children. It's hardly surprising then that her first encounter with the mysterious substance she would later learn was meth was all about energy. While former classmates were exploring the freedom of college life, Misty was juggling a never-ending cycle of responsibilities.
At first, meth was just for the energy. Then once I did it, I saw that everybody around had been doing it all along and I hadn't known it. It stayed social for a little bit, and then it took over my life. And then quicker than anything, I had to have it. And this took just a couple of weeks. I had more and more and more. It just took over that quickly. And then I wasn't social anymore. I did it behind everybody's backs because I didn't want to share it. A lot of people do that. They just don't want to share it. They just don't want to share.
Ella told me that Misty's experience fit a pattern she'd seen often.
Meth and drugs take your life, your family, your job, your home, and they leave you with nothing. But who doesn't want to feel better in the short term? The way meth works is that it hijacks your brain's reward system. It produces massive amounts of dopamine in your brain, which is your feel-good neurotransmitter. The brain wants more of it, so you crave the drug, and in time you will do anything to get it because you want to feel that good again. The other part of this is that you don't feel good unless you are using. And the things that used to bring you joy and happiness, like your family, like your church, like being in your garden, like being outside, they just can't stimulate the same amount of dopamine production as that drug does. It's a really vicious cycle. You feel good using, you become deeply depressed when you are not, and the only way to feel good is to use again.
Driven by craving, Misty's world and her focus continued to narrow.
As time progressed, people who used meth became the only people I knew. I knew maybe 75 of them from all over this region, from Tennessee, from here. I would drive and just hang out with people that had it, just like they did. You hear some people can try it once and become addicted. Mostly I've seen this happen with women. Men too, of course, but meth especially appealed to women because they liked that it gave them energy and they could be super mom. But then you start to hunt for more and more, and you've lost that cleaning urge. Your body just has to have it. You're not super mom anymore because you're hunting for it. That means you drive around until you found somebody who had it, or you just drive around and look for it, or you're spending all your time calling somebody, asking, where's it at? Where's it at? People do the most outrageous, craziest things trying to get this drug. A lot of people went to jail and went to prison for making meth, for stealing and worse. You realize anything's possible because when you're on meth, you have no morals. You'll do whatever you can to get it. That's how meth took the place of my kids and of everything I loved. It kept me from feeling that bad things that were happening around me or to me. I kept getting beat on, but that was okay because I would get my meth still.
Misty used meth at home and at work. While it's not unusual in Appalachia or anywhere to hear businesses complaining about hiring because potential applicants can't pass drug tests, shockingly, meth seemed more of a mixed bag to some employers early on.
I know it's out there in construction, and I think it's all through fast food as well. When I worked in fast food, that's all we did was use. On our breaks, we would go out and smoke or do a line. I've seen managers give meth to employees. It made the rush more tolerable, trying to get the food out on time because you're having to beat the clock. And with hard physical work like painting or construction, some people used it on the job because it kept their mind focused. They thought they did a better job, but then it just took over and you had to get the job done to get your money. It might have been a great job, but once meth took control, you didn't care what the job looked like. The goal was to get paid and go score.
Meth may have offered energy for a spell, but Misty knew the crash always came next.
Coming down off that high, nobody wants to be around you. You've been up a day and a night or more. You could be crying or mad. Emotions can take over. You get very moody if you don't have more. All you want to do is sleep. You're not eating. Meth suppresses your appetite. You lose weight. It's just bad. And for people like me who have mental illness, it affects a lot more than just your physical self.
Mental illness and meth use go hand in hand. They claim it's 50% co-occurring, meaning mental illness and drug use or addiction happen at the same time, often leading to a dual diagnosis in a treatment facility. But from my clinical experience in behavioral health, I suspect the overlap is much higher.
Over the course of her career, Ella has cared for hundreds of patients whose mental illness dovetailed with drug abuse. In Misty's case, her meth addiction connected to being bipolar.
You can snort meth, shoot it up. You can eat it. Yes, people eat it. You can eat it raw or put it in your coffee or soup or sprinkle it over your food. But everyone knows there's a toll on your body. Everybody I know lost a lot of weight. And I've known many people who've ended up with heart problems or with COPD from smoking. It can make your teeth bad. I know people whose teeth have fallen out just from the chemicals. But meth never works like it did at the beginning. Never. If you stopped, you won't go back to where you were the first time. You'll go back to where you stopped at, meaning on the amount you do. You don't get as high, but if you do as much as you were doing at the end, you could overdose. And if you've quit for a while and then relapse, you don't go back to the beginning where it was fun. You go back and start where you stopped from. And it's still the bad, the bad, the bad. It's never the good again. It never starts again from being fun. It only goes from the bad.
The bad meant several things to Misty. First among them was overdosing. And yes, people do overdose on meth.
Meth feels like it could explode your heart if you do so much, or like you could have a heart attack because it speeds up your heart so fast. And the other bad is you have no relationships left, no healthy relationships. No one who's not using wants to be around someone who is. And if you are using, you don't want to be around someone who isn't because they don't have your drug. It just wears people down over time. Everybody starts out different, but after meth, they're just alike afterwards. There's not a good meth addict or a bad one. We're all people, but everybody ends up the same way. No jobs, homeless, looking for meth, living in tents.
Public attention may have turned to opiates for the moment, with drug company lawsuits and payouts dominating the news. But behind the headlines, the drudgery of addiction hasn't changed.
Meth has been going on and on and on here in the mountains for so many years. The government or people who simply hear the news may close their eye on it for a minute or two. Right now, the focus is going to opiates, But in a few more years, the opiates may drop down and the attention will be back on meth again. Everything has its moment. That's how it seems.
Okay, so I didn't know how the time was going to go. I think we have more time than I thought. So we're going to wait on Michael's part that was going to come right here and come back to that and just keep on a little bit more. I'll tell us when to stop on page 19, if that's okay.
That sounds good.
Okay, great. So this is jumping ahead to another section of the essay called Trash Cans and Soda Bottles. This brings me to the question of whether meth and opioids are both sought by the same people. Did opioids actually replace meth as the drug of choice for those already addicted? And why is meth use now rising here as everywhere again? To be blunt, Misty had told me it's just what's available when. We live up in the mountains after all, where the price of gas is higher because it can be, phone signal is in short supply, and even legal consumer choices of all kinds can be limited. Misty was clear that her drug of choice was always meth, but like most of her circle, she was simply driven by addiction, and so switched substances interchangeably, depending on what could be found at any given time.
Yeah, I switched between drugs, and I know several others who did. They're called trash cans because they didn't care what they used as long as they had something. For some, that was fun, but I knew several people like me that didn't want to live life to face the truth. They just wanted to hide from it. But either way, I know a lot of people switched back and forth. If they didn't have one thing, they'd do something else. Or they might say, I'm going to quit this, but that meant they would just change their drug.
Misty distinguished what she saw as the common practice of going between drug types from actually using meth and opioids together.
It depends on the person, because I knew people who liked mixing opiates and speed, a cocktail, and having different effects all at once. I think it's still very common for people to go back and forth and use both. It might be what's available, or they might be saying, I'm not going to do this today, I'm going to quit meth. Then they'll go to opiates instead, or vice versa, because opiates can feel like either a downer or an upper, and meth is an upper. Or they could be switching off their drug because this ain't working no more, so I'm going to try this for a while. Ain't working, meaning not having that euphoria they crave, so they do something different for a while to get that euphoria, that high.
Unlike mixing the two deliberately, Misty saw the movement between meth and opioids as being less of a conscious choice and more of a matter of necessity.
Definitely, it's more of a supply and demand thing, because for me as an addict, I didn't care as long as I got something. I didn't care what it was because I didn't want to live life or deal with the reality of life.
Misty agreed with Ella that opioid use gradually took public attention and moved media scrutiny away from meth, while users stayed focused on meeting their most immediate needs, regardless of where the national conversation might be headed.
At the beginning, you would hear about meth all the time and hear how people were getting busted for it. It's been out there for years and years, since the 70s from what I've heard, but it became an epidemic in the late 90s and early 2000s. Nobody knew how to deal with it then. There was no education in it. I think addiction's addiction, but meth messes with your brain and makes you overthink. It's more violent, and people on meth sometimes can be more dangerous. In the early 2000s, ingredients were easy to get. You could find everything that you needed on the periodic chart. Basically, with the periodic table, you have to have one thing from each color to make the whole. Then they took away some ingredients, but you could get ingredients in other household items, so you could break those down to get the same chemical. People just found ways to get around the restrictions to get what they needed by breaking stuff down. And once they restricted the sale of pseudoephedrine, yeah, there were other ways to get it. That controlled it some, but it's not just going to be controllable. I mean, the new laws made meth harder to make at times, but at the same time, you can still get it. People basically made meth for themselves more than to sell. No one would be making it if they didn't use. Back in the day, a lot of people were making it, and that process can be an addiction itself as well. You're inventing something, you're creating something, and you've made this, and it's good. And then it becomes an addiction because you're trying to get it better. You're trying to make it over and over again. Later, people started making it in liter plastic soda bottles. I don't think it was safer, but it was easier access because you didn't have to have as many chemicals as you would have the other way. I think there were more explosions with soda bottles than doing it the other way. But whenever they took away ingredients or made them harder to get, people learned how to make it in the soda bottle thing because it was easier access and easier to do. But from when I started in the late 90s until now, I've seen the quality go downhill because people make it pretty nasty ways nowadays. I mean, no drug's a clean drug, but they're making it in ways now that it does cause more people to do more bad things because it's not as clean and it's cheaply made. People are still trying to do it themselves, and it's hard to get everything you need because every chemical that you mix in needs its own other chemical to match up. But if people don't have that matching chemical, then it's not going to be right. It's called dirty dope because it's trashy and it messes up your mind worse because it's not as clean or pure. Right now, I personally hear a lot about meth, but maybe because meth was my drug of choice, so it's stuck in my brain every time I see that word. But on the other hand, I think you do hear a lot about fentanyl and all that, more so now than meth. But I think it's just because it seems like every so often you'll have one drug that's more so than another. And then a few years later, one drug will disappear for a while and another will come back, just depending on how plentiful it is. Every so often you have more meth in the world than opiates or vice versa. And then you have more opiates than meth. It just depends on the supply.
Okay, I think we'll stop at that point. We've jumped around about a third of the book version of this essay. It's really pretty long, but we'll stop here for 2 poems by Misty's son, Michael, who's going to jump on here with me, and then invite your questions. So Misty's younger son, who's now in community college, has found writing to be a helpful and therapeutic way to express himself. He started doing it in middle school, and he's going to read 2 poems he wrote 2 years apart back in high school about the way the addictions of his parents have affected him. Let me take this.
This is a poem called An Addict's Son, was written 2018. Okay. My life was not so fun. I lived with felons, but we owned a gun. Everyone knew what was going on, but no one cared to get involved. Everything we owned, we took to pawn just to buy pills or post a bond. I'm getting tired of people not trusting me just because of my family. No matter what I do, people think I'll end up like them. I can go to job interviews, but who would hire an addict's son? What about college? He'll go to parties and always get drunk. They expect the worst. But what can you expect? I'm just an addict's son. I can decide to be like them or not to. It depends on the things I do. I know, well, I'm an addict's son. Will that ever change? I can tell you now, I will make a change. So I am never the father to an addict's son. Okay, so my next one is a part 2 to this poem that I wrote in 2020. The same name, it's an addict's son. I am an addict's son. It's not their fault that I sometimes get stoned. You can't blame anyone for your own addictions. No, I don't do meth or pills. Self-medication kills. If not yourself, then everyone else. My addictions may just be nicotine and weed, but help is what I need. Again, I am an addict's son, and life was not so fun. There are diseases inside of us, but that doesn't mean that we can't cure it. We just need people to believe in us and see I am more than just an addict's son.
So now we're glad to take your questions through Denise and the chat. And I think especially Ella and Michael are the experts here. So they'll especially be glad to take your questions.
I'm not going to ask a question, Michael, but I'm going to say thank you for sharing that. That was, when I read that, when I was meeting with Susan, I was so moved by your honesty and insight and willingness to put that out there. So for all of us that come from that background, it just really resonates with me. And I thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So any comments or questions for anybody that's speaking today? While people are thinking, we've had a couple people on here who were in foster care, and we've heard about kind of, I think, Michael, what you're talking about being judged because of who your family is and not feeling like you really have the opportunity to show who you are because you're kind of living up to preconceived notions of what you come from. So if you want to say something about that, either about how maybe we can make that different for kids currently living in foster care. So let me ask you two questions. I think the first one is, I always ask this question every Wednesday. What do you think the things were that helped you kind of create your own life that's a good life? Who were the people and events that shaped you in a positive way?
Definitely my foster parents. And I also took writing from them, and that helped me a lot with getting through, like getting closure for the things that I had been through. I am diagnosed with PTSD, and it helped a lot with that.
So your foster parents being able to write and be creative, we hear a lot about the art aspect of being able to create things.
And not just like about, you don't have to do something just about what went on in your life. I mean, I make jewelry too, and that helps, just crafts in general, artwork, anything that can really help with your trauma.
Yeah, creating positive things. So those were some of the things that helped you kind of rebuild your life. Do you have any advice or suggestions or comments about what's most helpful when you're a child in foster care? Like for those of us who currently work with children in foster care, what are some things we can do to make that a more bearable experience?
Have patience, I guess. I'm sure a lot of these people that helped me, they had to have a lot of patience.
Okay, that's helpful. Let me check the chat and just see. Mostly it's thank yous and how powerful the poems are, and thanks for sharing. If you do want to write a comment in the chat, not a question, I will send it to Ella and Annie and Susan and Michael when they're done, so they can read it later on when they have some time. And so I'll continue to keep my eye on the chat if you have a question or comment for them. Let's see, Susan, I'd kind of like to ask everybody, I guess one of the questions that we talk about every week is, how do you help for people who are struggling with trauma impacts or mental health disruptions or addiction? What are some of the ways that you have found to support the people who are struggling in those ways?
Well, the biggest thing I do is ask for advice from other people. That's the biggest thing. And just to be even in support groups, whether, of other people who are trying to help, whether they're foster parents or other people, I found support groups to be very helpful. But as a teacher at ASU, I teach creative writing. And I'm sure Annie's had a lot of the same experience where people coming into it, just, people you think, I tend to think of Appalachian students these days as kind of like, wealthier, upper middle class, have the Jeeps they're driving around and so on. But that just is really not the case. And when you start to teach writing, you just see that these people who have somehow become successful college students, even if that was their way of coping, just have tremendous, tremendous trauma in their past. And they are really looking to share it with other people. Especially I've been doing online classes the past couple of years, and I've found that people open up even more in those. And what I'm trying to say is, I just think that giving people a way to construct their stories, to structure them, basically, to make them shareable, to show them how to use how to find the details they remember, how to find kind of the corners of stories they might have forgotten or think, are not acceptable to share with other people, that when they do have the tools to share them in writing and or read them aloud and have that feedback from other people, it is just so empowering. And maybe Annie would want to say something about that as well, because I know she sees the same thing. And I think that is really, people write to me afterwards and, they just say, I never thought I would write about these things, but it's just been so empowering and freeing. And, just the process has really helped me to work through it. And so that's kind of a big group that I'm talking about, but I do think that, my way of helping people is helping them to tell their stories. And I've done a lot of writing workshops, just kind of one-time writing workshops for foster parents as well, foster and adoptive parents, really all over Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee. And it's amazing the stories that people have to tell if you can just kind of help them narrow it down to a moment that crystallizes their experience. But I'd love for Annie to talk about that also, because I know she's seeing the same thing in her teaching.
Annie?
I'm at the community college level. I agree. I'm always astounded by the things that my students have survived and the wisdom that they've gained from those experiences. And I just want them to see their stories as a source of power. And to, I always share that Dolly Parton quote, figure out who you are and then do it on purpose, and kind of to see the things that have been hard in their lives as sources of wisdom and strength. And I love seeing them take control of that and shape that narrative for that.
Thank you, Annie. Ella, do you have anything you'd like to add about ways to help people find or build their strengths?
Yeah, when you said that, this is what kind of popped in my head. I think it's important to have an honest conversation with people who are using substances, because it's easy to sit and shake your finger and say, you shouldn't do that. That's a terrible thing. It's going to ruin your life. Well, that turns people off quite quickly. So I think it's important to, have people tell you why they use, what's good about it. Why do you do it? What do you get out of it? Because, none of us operate for zero sum. We all do behaviors that get us something. It might not be a positive something, but it's a something. So that's kind of how I try to approach it, is have people, kind of tell about what's good about this. Why do they do it? What's their motivation? And then if you can get them to kind of start opening up and talking about that, it's easier for them to say, all right, what's bad about this? You lost your driver's license because you were drunk, or you got fired from your last job because your urine was dirty. So if they can start, naming positive, sometimes that kind of helps them see negatives about it too. And then they just have a better kind of foothold to make decisions about their use.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Michael, there was a comment in the chat, a question, that your poems are 1 year old and 3 years old, and they wondered if you still feel the stigma that you talked about now that you're an adult of being the son of an addict, or has that changed for you?
I feel it's still kind of there, but I don't think it's as big of a thing for me anymore. I don't really worry about it as much because I have seen that it's not as big of a deal as it feels to me.
Well, and I think it was Susan that mentioned we're from an incredibly small community and we all kind of know each other. And so not only, I was actually from a small community with a lot of addiction in my family, and everybody always, Friday nights, you knew whose house the cops had been to, and you knew who had spent the weekend in jail, and it just had a way of getting around. So I do think that as adults, we can sometimes change the circles in which we travel, or maybe the communities that we live in, and sometimes that helps maybe. Then Michael, they had another question for you, and that is, what are some of your successes and the things that you are proud of that you've done?
My biggest success is graduating high school. I've had other successes since then, but I feel like as soon as I passed and went through high school, I feel like everything kind of came into place. So I've also got like my welding degree and certificates. And I have been selling a lot of jewelry at craft shows and online and where galleries now.
That's really cool. That's not the easiest thing to have happen. My daughter wants to be an artist, and so I'm watching some of that unfold right now. So I know how hard you must have worked to get that going. So good for you. So a comment was someone really smart said that healing happens backwards. And so I have started asking those I work with, why haven't you used right now? So whatever our reason, realizing that sometimes you start with changing your mind. So just kind of following up on some of Ella's comments. Let's see, is there any other comments or questions from the group? I put the link to the book in the chat again, that they are reading excerpts from the essay that they wrote for a book that's a collection of essays. So the link is there in the chat. I'm trying to think of this was so radically different from things we've done before. I'm trying to think of some of the questions that we cover about how do you work with people from trauma? How do you help them build strength? And how do you stay well yourself? And I guess Ella, since you do work so closely with people who are struggling with addiction, what are some of the ways that you maintain balance between work and personal? And how do you know when you need to take care of your own needs or you need attention? And what are the things that you do to help with that?
That's a good question too. So I have been a nurse practitioner now for 20 years. I started in 2000, and I used to think it was my own personal mission to save the people who came along my path. You need saving, I'm going to do it somehow, even if you don't want it. But I think it's important to realize we can't change people. They have to do that, and not to carry that around with you when people aren't ready or not successful. And I think that's helped me a lot, that it's not, if you are not ready to change, I can't take that burden. I'm here for you and I can help you, but I can't do it for you. And to kind of let that go really helped me a lot, especially when people fall, as we all do, but it's not on me. And I think we all, when you work with people who have really heavy stories and burdens and trauma, it's you have got to realize, you can't pour from an empty cup. And if you don't take care of yourself, you cannot really fully be there to take care of others. So you got to healthy boundaries. I'm sorry, I can't be on that committee. I'm sorry, I can't work overtime. I've got to go do my thing with my family and work in my garden and go play with my dogs and go to church, whatever your thing is. But realizing, yes, Candace, but realizing that's just as important. You really do. You have to take care of yourself in this job to take care of others.
The other day, so we talk about this every single Wednesday about taking care of ourselves, our boundaries, blah, 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 that everybody should be proud of going to therapy. And so I have a therapy session on Friday, and there's a big meeting happening at that time that I usually lead. And I thought for a few days about which one do I step out of? Because I have to take leave to go to therapy. It's not like I can go in the back room of where I work and do therapy from there. I have to take leave and drive home. It's this whole thing. And so I am not easily scared, and I'm afraid of very little, but I went to a couple people on the team this is still the same week. I've been out of town for a couple days. So I guess this was Monday, and said, so I have a therapy session on Friday, and that's really important to me. And so I don't think I started back. I don't think I can be at the meeting on Friday because I can't be at two places at once. And so I'm hoping that the meeting will go on without me and that somebody else will lead it. And there was like 6 different people on the team, and everybody was like, absolutely, take care of yourself first. That's very important. You need to go do that. Yes, I will be happy to lead for you. But even now telling the story, my heart is pounding, my stomach is sick. It felt so risky to me to be like, I have to go to therapy instead of doing this work commitment thing. And it was no pushback, nothing negative at all, but it was terrifying to say, I'm gonna have to go to therapy instead of doing this work thing. So I had some practice this week with that. So a question is, any advice that you can give relatives of people with addictions to help their children? I know Michael mentioned patience, having a lot of patience. Any other ideas?
Can I, let me grab something real quick.
Yeah.
Let's see. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this book. I found one of the therapists that works on the crisis team at Watauga Hospital, he told me about this book and I read it and it really changed my perspective. It's called Beyond Addiction. Okay, bear with me. How science and kindness help people change. But it's a fantastic book. It's these PhD people who own, they run a program and it's for people. There you go. Yeah. Beyond Addiction, how science and kindness help people change. But it is a fantastic research for families who have people with addictions and how do you deal with that with healthy boundaries and at the same time taking care of yourself. It's really helped me give people good advice. So I would highly recommend this book if anybody's interested.
Thank you for that, Ella.
Yep.
Susan or Michael or Annie, any other ideas?
No, like I said before, patience.
I would just want to add, I think relatives are huge, hugely important. And, like Michael's grandmother, for example, really, I think, helped the kids to feel nurtured, helped to feel them, them to feel that there was like a family there. And, and his parents did too, even when they were struggling. It was really, really important for him to still, get to see them, to be around them, to experience the love that they might still have that they do still have for their children, even if they might be, struggling with other things. So just figuring out the ways that can happen, I think are really important. And, that comes more like after foster care, if you're in some situation after foster care where it's not regulated and set up. But, I just think that relatives are hugely important to keep in contact with, and they do a lot to support their children.
One of my favorite sayings is the number one factor to offset trauma is a relationship with a positive, consistent, caring adult. And so when we do trainings and things, we talk, and I'll put it in the chat. When we do trainings and things and we talk to people, not just about trauma and resilience, but what you can do to help or to make a difference. And we say that quote, you don't have to have a certification in anything. You don't have to take some big degree. You don't have to pay a lot of money. You can leave this Zoom and by going out and being a positive, consistent, caring person for someone, in each one of those interactions helps change the pathways in the brain. So for, if we do have people in our families or that we know or love who are struggling with addiction, who have children, whether it's going and eating lunch with them at school, being the Sunday school leader, a volunteer coach, taking them to the mall or to buy ice cream or to walk on the greenway, any of those positive, consistent interactions helps heal their brains. That's one thing we talk a lot about.
If I can add something on another subject, I just feel like, being in this community, we are so lucky to have the school system that we do. And to have you, Denise, who has spearheaded this huge, huge effort to make people aware of trauma and resilience and recovery and ACEs and all the things that go through it. And, just through the years, I have just been amazed at the school personnel here, that with Michael, they have never given up on him ever. And he tried to make them, they still wouldn't. And, it has just been amazing, from like Candace Walker and Shelley Klutz, who is the head of the school nurses, is so generous in sharing her stories, and her, dealing with PTSD with students. And I'm sure that touches many, many people, but she was so instrumental, in helping us, and Jennifer Wandler, Daniel Bolster when he was here, Corey Braxton, but really all the way back through elementary school. I just can't remember that far, but I think we're just tremendously lucky to have such kind of a wraparound school system. And, I hope it's not unique, but it feels like it might be. But, I just think you all are amazing. What do you want to say? Oh, yeah. And Robin Smith, formerly EBA at Parkway, she really helped Michael start writing his stories and telling his stories, and really helped them build them into something spectacular. And, she was a tough teacher, an excellent teacher, and just having that kind of structure and that kind of feedback really helped him not just kind of feel like better emotionally about them, but he felt like he really made something out of his trauma because she helped him so much, so I just think the teachers have been amazing, and the school personnel have been amazing. And, I just think it's incredible they don't give up. And, it really has an impact.
Thank you for saying that, Susan. The line you said about they didn't give up even though he tried to make them, we do compassionate schools training, trauma-informed school training. We talk about the kids who have trauma experience are experts at making you give up, at making you stop caring, at trying to fracture the relationship, and that they need it more than somebody else would. And so not to take things personally and to hang in there. Tony Arcane, who spoke at our first conference, said, you don't have the right to give up hope on anybody, that's not your decision to make, that we all have to keep holding on. Obviously, you have to have boundaries and try to take care of yourself as well. But when you said that, that made me think of that. And that's true for all of us, whether we're in the school system or not. Always keep hope alive. I've said many times, people believed in me long before I ever believed in myself. And sometimes the people seeing things in you for your future makes you understand that it's possible for you. So thanks for that. So any last comments? We'll probably start to wrap up. Ella and Annie and Michael and Susan, anything that y'all would like to add before we go?
I don't think so. I really appreciate the chance to share these stories. And, if you have a chance to, take a look at the book in the library, I think it may be in the public library also, but it's definitely in the ASU library. It is an expensive book, but there are ways to see it. And so I hope people will take a look at it, especially we're kind of they wanted some stories from people, who are experiencing addiction, which is how, I came into writing this story about Misty, and brought in Ella as the expert, but there's a lot in it for healthcare providers. That's really the main focus of the book. So I hope people will take a look at that also from the front lines of the Appalachian addiction crisis.
Okay, thank you. I put the link in there a couple of times. Annie, any last thoughts before we let y'all go and sign off?
Just the power of storytelling and people feeling feeling that support for telling stories. It's encountering these voices has been really, really meaningful for me. So thank you so much. I was really honored to be a part of this and learn more about my community.
Thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. Ella, any last thoughts?
No. Thank you, Susan. Thank you for letting me be a part of this.
Gosh, thank you so
Michael,
much.
I always enjoy listening to you speak. I don't know, you just have a really good way of presenting yourself, and you really do. You have a really powerful story. I hope you never forget to tell it.
Thanks, everybody. It was an honor and a privilege to be with you each today and to hear the parts of your story that you had time to share with us. So thank you for doing that. Just a quick word to everyone in the audience that we're going to take the next 2 weeks off for Christmas. Y'all heard me say a couple of months ago, I thought we were winding down. And since I let those words come out of my mouth, guests are just falling out of the sky into my lap. So we're booked all the way through February. So it doesn't look like we're going to be ending anytime soon, but we are going to take 2 weeks off for Christmas. We'll be back here in January to kick off 2022 with everyone. Susan and Michael and Ella and Annie, thank you so much for being with us today. We hope the rest of your day goes well. It was great to spend time with you. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future. So everybody have a great rest of the day, and we hope you have a good week, good holidays. Remember that the holidays are not good for everyone, that some people have a lot of grief around the time of the holidays or no family or friends to share with. So if you're feeling strong and able to do so, if you'll reach out to someone that you know who may be struggling or having a tough time or feeling alone, I know they'll appreciate that. So I'm going to turn off the recording.